I want to give you a second argument as to why you should have deep respect for the truth and power of orthodoxy. Not to be skeptical about it, and you certainly should be very, very, very careful to think that, like, you know what, maybe we could just kind of monkey around with the doctrine here because, our culture kind of wants us to rechange this part over here and then we'll be more acceptable to our culture. That pressure has been on Christians everywhere all the time. It's just that the pressure, just like, can you just change this doctrine here a little bit? Now, the argument I want to give to you this time is that inside of Orthodox doctrine itself, the fundamental understanding of God and salvation that's presented in the Bible, inside of the sound Orthodox teaching is a sustained power and fruitfulness, and it's different if you change the doctrine, if you change the meaning. So to give you an example of this, so in my previous video, I talked about the historical example of those who believed in the true divinity of the Son, that the Son of God was the second person of the Godhead, co-equal with the Father, infinite God, fully God in all his divine attributes, just like the Father. That's what the Orthodox position believed. And then there was an opposing position, which historically was where they were called the Arians, following after their teacher Arius. And they believed that he isn't fully co-equal with the Father, but he's divine. And he came to earth to show us the way. I mean, it sounds so close to Christianity, doesn't it? And that, so we are to be in awe of him. We can even worship him. But here is how the Arian doctrine is heretical and not sound orthodoxy, sound and correct teaching from the Bible. Because really, inside of the fundamental attributes of God is how can God heal the problem as fully righteous and fully just? And then how can God heal the human condition that we are wicked and that we deserve the wrath and condemnation of God, and yet how can we receive his love and be redeemed and saved and be accepted and cherished by him forever and ever? How can that be? Well, in the Arian answer, first, Jesus is not co-equal with the Father. So he's not the same God as the full Godhead. So then there's several things. One, he doesn't have to have the same exact attributes. That's one. That's one way. Now the doctrine changes. Now, why does that matter? Because then one who is not fully God, did not come to redeem us. And then there's a second question. Here's another question. In the Arian doctrine, the one who came to redeem us did not come to redeem us by he who is fully God became fully man to die the death we deserve, to atone for the wickedness that is rightfully, that we are guilty of and for which we deserve eternal wrath and condemnation. Instead, what he did is he came to make us better. He came to make us better by giving us a great example, by living so much better as he could be. He's like us, except he's better than us. He's like divine, but he's not truly God himself. He's not the same as the Father, but he can try to behave like the Father. He could show us a way. In other words, he was such a great teacher. He was such a great moral example that if we would hear his teaching and if we would follow after his example, we would become more divine like Jesus, and that's how we can be saved. That was the Arian teaching. And you know what? That's an old teaching. It's also a very common teaching. That's the same teaching as Unitarians. It's the same teaching as Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't believe that Jesus, they say he is divine, but they don't say he is co-equal with the Father, fully God, infinite God, like the way the Bible teaches, or at least what we believe that the Bible actually teaches. So they get into passages of the Bible and they'll disagree with the verses of this, and that, and they'll come up with a different hermeneutic, a different interpretive system and structure so that they could justify this view of Jesus as not co-equal with the Father, and thus now you have unorthodox or you have heretical teaching. And you know what this happens? So in the core of their view, salvation is really about how hard you try to be like Jesus. It is a moral exemplar doctrine. It is a works righteousness, legalistic doctrine of you try hard to be like his example. That's at the core of that doctrine. But in Orthodox Christian doctrine, you have the gospel, and I told you, the gospel is at the center of how to understand the Bible. The gospel is what fulfills the whole meta-narrative arc of the Bible. The gospel it doesn't just teach us how God saved us. It is the good news of who is God and what God is actually like. That there's actually this incredible dilemma in the Bible of the divinity of God at stake. Will God break and fail the fullness of his divinity? The full divine essence is at stake, because if he fails his righteousness, then he is not God. I told you, apart from which he is not God. If he fails his righteousness, he has now failed to be God. If he fails love, apart from which he is not God, true love, infinite love of God, the infinite love attributes of God, that which makes God God, then he's failed his very divinity, has failed the essence of God. So that's in the Bible. The story, the grand narrative, the grand meta-narrative of the Bible isn't just about how human beings can be redeemed, about how humans, even underlying that is the question of the true, what is God? What makes God God? How can God stay God? How can God not fail as God? So this is at the core of this question of orthodoxy, and you get a different story. You get a fundamentally different understanding of who is God and what is God, and it breaks the different understanding of the attributes of what makes God in his essence, apart from which he is not. He ceases to be God. And so in the true truth of the Bible, you get to the gospel. And the gospel has this strange thing, 3 persons, 1 essence, the second person of the Holy Trinity at the will of the Father. He's co-equal with the Father, came to heal the human condition. We deserved wrath and condemnation, and the full justice and righteousness of God demands that there must be damnation for us who deserve it, because righteousness was defeat evil. And at the same time, but he's merciful and he loves us and wants us to come into fruition. And then otherwise, because if he just damns and condemns all the wicked human beings, who will be his sons? He made us to be his sons and daughters. He made us actually to be like the second person of the Trinity himself, and to have this great communion that the Son has with the Father. The Son and the Father's profound love and oneness of communion together, and he made us for that. So if he did that, his very plans, his love would fail, his love in us would fail, and we'd all just be damned and condemned. His love would fail, and then his divinity would fail. How's that? But the orthodox teaching of the Bible, the gospel, which is the central key to the grand meta-narrative, like I told you, teaches that the second person of the Holy Trinity, who is fully God, became fully human specifically so that he could live the life we should have lived, but then die the death we deserve to die, so that the full wisdom and the full divinity of God would not fail but would succeed, and he would prove his great righteousness and his love and his wisdom and his omniscience. And that history then becomes a stage for the glory of God. This is what makes God glorious. And we can then recognize who is God for who he really is. And it comes out in the sound and correct and teaching of the Bible, orthodoxy. So don't poo-poo orthodoxy. Don't disrespect orthodoxy. Don't monkey with orthodoxy. And especially for those of you that we want to raise up to be our leaders, to be certainly our elders, but even not just our elders, but our small group leaders, our discipleship leaders, even our praise leaders. Don't ever disrespect orthodoxy. Love orthodoxy. Drink it all in. Understand it in its depths. And then be in awe of the great glory of God and know him through the revelation of God, through his Son Jesus, whom the Bible exalts and knows and takes us to the Father and will live inside the Holy Spirit. And that power and fruit of this doctrine, of this teaching, as we begin to believe that the life of the Holy Spirit will come out, and the fruit and power of the Holy Spirit will come out, and it'll be sustained, and the gates of hell and sin, even though, will never prevail against this truth and orthodoxy, against the church, until Jesus returns.